On the night of December 24th, 1847, in Yazoo County, Mississippi, something happened that would send shockwaves through the entire American South. A 38-year-old enslaved cook named Maria calmly boiled her master and his 3 adult sons alive in giant cauldrons of pork oil. 4 white men died screaming as their skin melted like candle wax. The smell of burning flesh mixed with the scent of gingerbread baking in the oven. The last Christmas dinner the Thornwood family would ever have. By Christmas morning, Thornwood Plantation was a crime scene that would haunt Mississippi for generations. But this story doesn't begin on Christmas Eve. It begins 3 months earlier, in September 1847, when Maria watched her entire world burn in boiling oil. This is her story, and it's completely real. The Mississippi Delta in 1847 was the heart of King Cotton. Endless fields of white stretched as far as the eye could see, picked by hands that would never profit from their labor. Yazoo County was particularly brutal, even by the standards of the Deep South. Here, plantation owners competed to see who could extract the most cotton, break the most spirits, accumulate the most wealth on the backs of human beings, treated as farm equipment. Thornwood Plantation stood as one of the crown jewels of this empire of suffering. 1,500 acres of prime Delta soil, 200 enslaved people working from sunup to sundown, an annual cotton yield that made Master Edmund Thornwood one of the wealthiest men in Mississippi. The big house rose 3 stories high, with white columns that gleamed in the brutal southern sun. Magnolia trees lined the approach, a wide veranda wrapped around the entire structure. Inside, crystal chandeliers imported from France, furniture from England, carpets from Persia, all of it purchased with money extracted from cotton picked by bleeding fingers. Master Edmund Thornwood was 62 years old in 1847. Tall, lean, with iron-gray hair and cold-blue eyes that never showed mercy. Throughout the county, enslaved people whispered his nickname with fear, the Iron Master, not because he was strong, though he was, but because of his favorite tool of discipline, a branding iron with his initials, E.T. By 1847, Edmund Thornwood had personally branded 89 enslaved people, men, women, even children as young as 10. The iron was kept in his study, mounted on the wall like a trophy. He would heat it in the fireplace until it glowed red, then press it against bare flesh, usually the shoulder, sometimes the face if the transgression was severe enough. The smell of burning human skin was as common at Thornwood Plantation as the smell of cotton. Edmund had 3 sons, each one a reflection of their father's cruelty, each one worse than the last. Nathaniel, the eldest at 35, was tall and broad-shouldered with his father's cold eyes. He served as the head overseer, responsible for the field hands. Nathaniel had developed a quota system. Each enslaved person had to pick 200 pounds of cotton per day. Those who failed received 20 lashes at the whipping post. No exceptions. Pregnant women, elderly, sick, children, 20 lashes for everyone who fell short. In a good week, Nathaniel would personally whip 30 people. Jeremiah, the middle son at 32, was leaner than his brother, but somehow more vicious. He had dark hair and a thin mustache that he kept meticulously groomed. Jeremiah oversaw the processing operation, the cotton gin, the pressing, the loading. He was known for accidents. Enslaved people would get hands caught in machinery. Jeremiah would watch, timing how long it took for them to pass out from pain before stopping the machine. He kept a journal with detailed notes. He called it Scientific Observation of Negro Pain Tolerance. 7 people had died in Jeremiah's accidents over 5 years. Caleb, the youngest at 28, was blond like his mother had been, and handsome in a way that made him even more dangerous. He managed the house slaves and took particular interest in the younger women. His cabin behind the big house was where enslaved girls between 14 and 20 would be summoned. Sometimes they came back, sometimes they didn't. When questioned about a 16-year-old girl who disappeared, Caleb shrugged, probably ran away. They do that. Her body was found 3 months later in a shallow grave near the cotton gin. The Thornwood men competed with each other. Who could be more cruel? Who could extract more labor? Who could break more spirits? Sunday dinners at the big house often featured stories of punishments delivered that week, told like hunting tales. With laughter and bourbon, this was the world Maria lived in. Maria had been born in Yoruba territory in what is now Nigeria. Her original name was Ayomide, which meant "my joy has arrived." She remembered very little of her first 12 years, just fragments. Her mother's voice singing, the taste of palm wine, the feel of red earth between her toes. Drums at night, then the slavers came. The Middle Passage took 11 weeks. Maria, already renamed by Portuguese traders, arrived in Charleston, South Carolina in 1821, 12 years old, speaking no English, understanding nothing except that her entire world had been destroyed. She was sold to a rice plantation in the South Carolina Low Country. There, an elderly enslaved woman named Abigail took pity on the terrified child who cried every night. Abigail had been born in Africa too, from a different region, but she remembered. She taught Maria English, taught her how to survive, taught her which herbs could heal and which could kill. "Never forget what they took from us," Abigail would whisper. "Never forget you are Yoruba. You are not their property. You are a daughter of Africa, and one day the ancestors will demand payment for these crimes." Maria was taught to cook, a valuable skill that meant working in the big house instead of the rice fields. By age 16, she could prepare elaborate meals, French sauces, English roasts, Southern classics. Her hands learned the rhythm of kitchens, the knife against cutting board, the sizzle of meat in hot oil, the timing of ovens. At 18, she was sold to a plantation in Georgia. At 22, to another in Alabama. At 26, she ended up at Thornwood Plantation in Mississippi, purchased specifically because Master Edmund wanted an exceptional cook for his household. For 12 years, Maria cooked every meal the Thornwood family ate. She woke at 4:30 every morning, started the kitchen fires, prepared breakfast by 7 The family ate biscuits, ham, eggs, grits, gravy. After breakfast was cleared, Maria began preparing lunch. After lunch, dinner preparations began. The Thornwood family ate like kings. Roasted meats, vegetable dishes, fresh bread, pies, cakes. Everything made from scratch. Everything prepared by Maria's hands. The kitchen was her domain, a separate building behind the big house, connected by a covered walkway. Inside, enormous brick ovens, multiple fireplaces for cooking, work tables, shelves of spices and supplies, and 4 giant cast-iron cauldrons, each capable of holding 30 gallons of liquid. The cauldrons were used for everything: boiling water for laundry, rendering lard, making soap, and especially for deep frying. The Thornwood family loved fried chicken, fried pork, fried everything. Several times a week, Maria would fill a cauldron with pork oil, heat it to 375 degrees, and fry meat until golden brown. She knew exactly how hot oil needed to be, exactly how long it took to heat, exactly what happened when living flesh touched that temperature. Master Edmund trusted Maria completely. She had keys to every door in the big house, access to all supplies, freedom to move between kitchen and house at any hour. In 12 years, she had never given him reason to doubt her. She was the perfect slave, quiet, obedient, skilled. She said yes, master, and no, master, and kept her eyes down. She prepared meals that made guests praise the Thornwood household. She trained younger enslaved girls in cooking techniques. She ran the kitchen like clockwork. But Maria had a life beyond the kitchen. In 1835, at age 26, she had been married to Isaiah. Not a legal marriage. Enslaved people couldn't legally marry, but a ceremony performed by an elderly enslaved preacher named Moses, witnessed by the community in the slave quarters. Isaiah was the plantation blacksmith, a powerful man of 30, with hands scarred from years at the forge. He was intelligent, skilled, and one of the few enslaved men at Thornwood who could read, taught secretly by a previous owner's daughter before being sold. Isaiah and Maria built a life in the margins of slavery. They had a cabin in the slave quarters, one room, dirt floor, but theirs. At night, after endless labor, they would hold each other and whisper dreams of freedom. Isaiah talked about the North, about a place called Canada where slavery didn't exist, about the Underground Railroad, the secret network that helped enslaved people escape. One day, he would whisper, "One day we'll run. We'll be free." Maria wanted to believe him. In 1835, their first daughter was born, Grace. Maria had labored in the cabin while Isaiah held her hand and prayed to gods whose names he'd forgotten. When Grace emerged, perfect, beautiful, crying, Maria wept. Not from pain, from terror, because she knew what world her daughter had been born into. Grace was the property of Master Edmund Thornwood from her first breath. 4 years later, in 1839, their second daughter arrived, Hope, another perfect child. Another piece of Maria's heart walking around outside her body, vulnerable to every cruelty this world could deliver. Maria taught both girls everything she knew. Grace showed talent in the kitchen and began helping her mother at age 8. Hope was quieter, thoughtful, loved to listen to the stories the elderly enslaved people told about Africa. Both girls were beautiful, which Maria feared because she knew what happened to beautiful enslaved girls when they reached a certain age. But for 12 years, the family existed. Isaiah worked the forge. Maria worked the kitchen. Grace and Hope grew. They celebrated what they could. Christmas, when enslaved people were given a day off. Sundays, when they could gather and sing spirituals. Secret moments of joy, stolen from a system designed to crush them. Maria even allowed herself to hope. Maybe they would survive. Maybe the girls would grow up. Maybe Master Edmund would keep his word. He'd once drunkenly promised Isaiah freedom after 30 years of service. Maybe. By September 1847, Grace was 12. Hope was 8. Isaiah was 42. Maria was 38. They had no way of knowing that they had exactly 3 months left as a family. The morning of September 18th, 1847, began like any other. Maria woke at 4:30 as always. Isaiah was already awake. He started even earlier, needing to get the forge fires hot before the workday began. They dressed in darkness, kissed quietly so as not to wake the girls, and stepped out of their cabin into the pre-dawn Mississippi air. The slave quarters at Thornwood consisted of 40 cabins arranged in 2 rows, each cabin housing 4 to 6 people. 200 souls packed into structures that would barely house farm animals in the north. No windows. Dirt floors, gaps in the walls that let in winter wind and summer mosquitoes, but it was home. The only home they had. Isaiah headed toward the blacksmith shop. Maria walked toward the big house kitchen. They didn't know it was the last time they would ever touch. Maria spent the morning as she always did, preparing breakfast, serving the family, cleaning up, beginning lunch preparations. The Thornwood men were in good spirits. They'd received news of excellent cotton prices. The harvest was going well. Profits would be high this year. Master Edmund was particularly cheerful. He actually smiled at Maria when she served his eggs. "Good work, Maria. This is the best breakfast I've had in weeks." "Thank you, Master," Maria replied, eyes down, face neutral. She had no idea what was coming. At 10:06 a.m., Master Edmund's voice boomed across the plantation. "Bell! Ring the bell!" The overseer rang the large bell, used to summon all enslaved people. This only happened for 3 reasons: Sunday services, Christmas, or public punishments. It was Thursday, not Sunday, not Christmas. Maria's stomach dropped. All work stopped immediately. Field hands dropped their tools. House slaves emerged from the big house. The blacksmith shop fell silent. Everyone gathered in the large open area in front of the big house, the same area where cotton bales were loaded onto wagons, where the whipping post stood, where examples were made. 200 enslaved people stood in the burning Mississippi sun, waiting. Maria saw Isaiah emerge from the blacksmith shop, confusion on his face. Their eyes met across the crowd. Grace and Hope appeared from the cabin where they'd been watching younger children. The family found each other instinctively, standing together, waiting to see what fresh horror Master Edmund had planned. Master Edmund stood on the veranda of the big house, his 3 sons flanking him like disciples. Nathaniel held a whip, Jeremiah held a rifle, Caleb held a torch, odd, given it was broad daylight. "Bring him out," Master Edmund commanded. 2 overseers dragged Samuel, the driver, the enslaved man who supervised other enslaved workers, into the center of the gathering. Samuel was shaking, eyes wide with terror. "This morning," Master Edmund announced, his voice carrying across the silent crowd, "tools went missing from the blacksmith shop. Expensive tools. Tools that cost me money." Maria felt Isaiah tense beside her. "Samuel here came to me with information. Seems our blacksmith has been stealing, planning to sell them, planning to buy his freedom. That's a lie." Isaiah's voice rang out before he could stop himself. Every eye turned to him, speaking out of turn, challenging Master. This was death. Master Edmund smiled, a cold, terrible smile. "Bring the blacksmith." Overseers grabbed Isaiah. He actually fought them, landing a punch that broke one overseer's nose. But there were 6 of them. They overwhelmed him with clubs and fists, dragged him to the center, forced him to his knees. Maria grabbed her daughters, pulled them close. "Don't look. Don't look." But she couldn't look away. Master Edmund descended the veranda steps slowly, savoring the moment. He walked to Isaiah, bent down, grabbed his chin, forced eye contact. "You've been a good blacksmith, Isaiah. 14 years of good work. But stealing? That I cannot allow. If I let one Negro steal, soon all of you will think you can take what's mine." "I didn't steal anything," Isaiah said quietly, dignified even in this moment. "Samuel lies to curry favor. There are no missing tools. Check your inventory." "I don't need to check anything," Master Edmund replied. "Samuel told me." "That's enough." He straightened, turned to address the crowd. "I'm going to make an example today. An example that will be remembered. An example that will ensure none of you ever think about stealing from me again." He nodded to his sons. Nathaniel and Jeremiah walked into the kitchen building. They emerged carrying one of the giant cauldrons between them. The thing was massive, empty. It took 2 strong men to carry. They placed it in the center of the open area, positioned over a fire pit normally used for rendering lard. Then they went back, came up with a 2nd cauldron, then a 3rd. Maria's mind couldn't process what she was seeing. The cauldrons! Her cauldrons. The ones she used for cooking. Why were they— "Fill them," Master Edmund commanded. It took 30 minutes. Enslaved men were forced to carry buckets of pork oil from the kitchen storage, barrels and barrels of it, the expensive lard used for cooking. They poured it into the 3 cauldrons until each was half full. 15 gallons of oil per cauldron. Then Master Edmund's sons lit fires underneath each one. The crowd watched in confused horror. What was happening? Why oil? Why 3 cauldrons? Maria knew. Maria knew exactly what oil did when heated to 400 degrees. She knew because she cooked with it every day. She knew the sound it made when it reached temperature, that low, deadly bubbling. She knew what happened when meat touched it. She knew. "Please," she heard herself whisper. "Please, no. Please, God, no." Isaiah looked at her across the space between them. 20 feet apart. Too far to touch. Too far to help. "I love you," he mouthed. Grace and Hope clung to their mother, not understanding yet, knowing only that something terrible was about to happen. The fires burned hot. The Delta sun beat down. 200 enslaved people stood frozen, forced to watch. The oil began to heat. First just warm, then hot, then very hot. After 40 minutes, the oil reached temperature. 375 degrees Fahrenheit. The surface bubbled gently. "Ready for frying." "Strip him," Master Edmund commanded. The overseers tore Isaiah's clothes off until he stood naked in front of everyone, exposed, humiliated, but still standing tall. Still looking Master Edmund in the eye. "Do you have anything to say?" Master Edmund asked. "I am innocent," Isaiah replied. "And you are going to hell for what you've done to my people." Master Edmund's expression didn't change. "Put him in." 4 overseers grabbed Isaiah. He fought with everything he had, the strength of a blacksmith who'd worked the forge for 14 years. He actually threw one overseer to the ground, broke another's arm with a wild punch, but there were too many. They overwhelmed him, tied his hands behind his back with rope. tied his feet together. Then they carried him to the first cauldron. "No!" Maria screamed. She tried to run forward. Two enslaved women held her back, not cruelty but mercy, because running forward would mean dying too. "Daddy!" Grace and Hope shrieked. Isaiah looked at his family one last time. "Remember you are loved," he said calmly. "Remember you are Yoruba. Remember." They lowered him into the oil. What happened next will haunt every word of this story. When human skin touches oil heated to 375 degrees, it doesn't burn slowly. It cooks instantly, like meat. Isaiah's scream was not human. It was a sound that shouldn't exist, a sound of agony beyond any description. His entire body convulsed. The oil bubbled violently around him as moisture in his skin turned to steam. The smell was of frying pork, because that's what he was. Meat, cooking. His skin blistered immediately, huge bubbles forming and popping. The outer layer began to separate, sloughing off in strips. In the first 30 seconds, his entire body turned red, then white, then started to blacken. He thrashed with superhuman strength, the rope binding his hands snapping. His hands broke the surface, reaching, grasping at air, at life, at anything. The overseers pushed him back under with long poles. Isaiah's screams continued for 4 minutes. 4 minutes of inhuman agony. His eyes boiled in their sockets. His tongue swelled and burst. His hair singed away. The fat beneath his skin liquefied and sizzled. Maria collapsed. Her legs simply gave out. She fell to the dirt, Grace and Hope falling with her, all three of them screaming, begging, praying to any god who would listen. But the Christian God didn't stop it. The Yoruba spirits didn't stop it. No one stopped it. After 4 minutes, Isaiah's screams changed to gurgling as his lungs filled with fluid. After 6 minutes, the sound stopped. After 8 minutes, his body stopped moving. Master Edmund checked his pocket watch. 8 minutes. Interesting. I expected less. Jeremiah was writing in his journal. The oil continued to bubble around Isaiah's corpse. 200 enslaved people stood in absolute silence. Some were crying. Most were frozen in trauma. This was beyond anything they'd experienced. This was hell made real. Master Edmund turned to the crowd. That is what happens to thieves. Let this be a lesson you carry to your graves. He started to walk away. Then Jeremiah spoke up. Father, wait. Master Edmund turned. Yes. Jeremiah pointed at Maria, Grace, and Hope, collapsed in the dirt. The blacksmith's family. They have his blood, his thief blood. Shouldn't they be punished too? As a complete example, Master Edmund considered this. The woman is my cook. I need her. The daughters then, Caleb added, his handsome face eager. They're old enough to know right from wrong. If we punish them, the lesson is complete. An entire family destroyed for theft. No one will ever steal again. Master Edmund thought about it, nodded slowly. You make a fair point. A complete example. He looked at the overseers. Bring the daughters. Time stopped. Maria's mind shattered. She threw herself at Master Edmund's feet. Please, please. They did nothing. They're children. Please take me. Kill me, not them. Not them! Master Edmund stepped over her like she was a puddle. Grace and Hope were 12 and 8 years old. They didn't understand what was happening. They only knew terror. Mama! Hope screamed as overseers grabbed her. Mama, help! Grace shrieked. Maria tried to run to them. 4 enslaved women held her back. Held her for her own survival, because running forward meant dying too. And if she died, then all 3 would be gone. And what would be the point? Grace, Hope. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Maria's screams tore her throat raw. The girls fought. Grace bit an overseer's hand hard enough to draw blood. Hope kicked and scratched like a wild animal. But they were children, small, weak. The overseers tied them together, back to back, arms and legs bound. The 2 girls clung to each other, their last comfort in this world. It's okay, Hope, Grace whispered to her little sister. It's okay. Mama's here. Daddy's waiting. We'll be together. They were carried to the second cauldron. No. No, God, please, no. Take me. Take me instead. Maria's voice broke completely. The Thornwood sons watched with interest. Nathaniel timing it. Jeremiah with his journal. Caleb smiling. They lowered Grace and Hope into the oil together. What happened to those two little girls cannot be fully described in words, should not be described, but must be described because this is what slavery was. This is what America did. Their screams were high-pitched, childish, terrified. The sound of children dying in agony. Grace's last words were, "Mama." Hope's last words were just screaming. The oil bubbled violently. Two small bodies thrashed together, bound to each other, dying together. Their skin blistered and peeled. Their small hands reached out of the oil, grasping for a mother who couldn't reach them. It took them longer to die than their father. Children have more will to live. It took Grace 7 minutes. Hope 8. Maria watched every second, was forced to watch. Couldn't look away even when she closed her eyes because the sounds, the smells, the knowledge of what was happening, all of it burned into her brain forever. When silence finally came, when both girls stopped moving, stopped living, Maria didn't scream anymore. She made a sound that wasn't human, a keening, broken sound of a mother whose children have been murdered in front of her eyes. Then she stopped making any sound at all. She just stared at the cauldrons, at the oil, at her family, dead, boiled like meat. Something in Maria's mind broke completely in that moment. The part of her that was human, that could feel anything except rage, that could remember mercy or kindness or love. It died. What remained was something else, something ancient and terrible, something that had been born in Yoruba territory 38 years ago and dragged across an ocean and beaten and enslaved and finally, pushed beyond what any human being could endure. What remained was vengeance given flesh. Master Edmund walked past Maria. He paused, looked down at her collapsed form. "You can take the bodies out after they cool. Bury them wherever you people bury your dead. You'll be back in the kitchen tomorrow morning. I expect breakfast at 7 as usual." Then he walked away. His sons followed. The overseers dispersed the crowd. Everyone was sent back to work, and Maria was left there, in the dirt, staring at 3 cauldrons of cooling oil that contained her entire world. Maria didn't remember being helped back to her cabin, didn't remember the 3 days she spent lying on the dirt floor, staring at nothing, saying nothing. Elderly women from the quarters brought her water, forced her to drink, whispered prayers over her. On the 4th day, Maria stood up. She walked to the makeshift graveyard where enslaved people were buried, unmarked plots in a clearing beyond the cotton fields. There she found 3 fresh graves. The community had taken Isaiah, Grace, and Hope from the cauldrons after the oil cooled, had cleaned the bodies as best they could, had buried them with prayers and tears. Maria stood at the graves. The sun was setting, painting the Mississippi sky blood red. She didn't cry, couldn't cry. She was beyond tears. Instead, she spoke to her dead family in Yoruba, words she'd almost forgotten, words Abigail had taught her decades ago, words from the language of her first 12 years. "Ancestors, hear me. My family has been taken by demons. I call upon you for strength. I call upon you for guidance. I call upon you for vengeance." She cut her palm with a sharp stone. "Let blood drip onto each grave. By this blood I swear they will pay. Every one of them. The same way they killed you, exactly the same way. I will make them feel what you felt. I will make them scream as you screamed. I will boil them alive." The wind picked up, rustling through the cotton fields. "I don't care if I die afterward. I don't care about freedom or escape or anything else. I only care about justice. Give me the strength to see this through. Give me the patience to wait for the perfect moment. Give me the coldness to do what must be done." She pressed her cut palm to each grave in turn. "Isaiah, my love. Grace, my firstborn. Hope, my baby. Rest now, watch me. I will make this right." Maria walked back to her cabin. She washed her face, changed her clothes, and reported to the kitchen the next morning at 4:30 a.m. Master Edmund looked up from his newspaper when she served breakfast. "Ah, Maria, good to have you back. The biscuits were terrible while you were gone." "Yes, Master," Maria replied, her voice empty. "I trust you understand why yesterday's punishment was necessary. Theft cannot be tolerated. Order must be maintained." "Yes, Master. Good. I knew you'd see reason." "You're one of the smart ones." Maria said nothing, just poured his coffee, set down his plate, and returned to the kitchen, and there, surrounded by the tools of her trade, the knives, the ovens, the cauldrons. Maria began to plan. Over the next 3 months, Maria became the perfect slave. She was quieter than before, but that was understandable after such trauma. She worked even harder, preparing more elaborate meals, baking more frequently, ensuring the Thornwood family wanted for nothing. Master Edmund praised her work. The sons complimented her cooking. Even the mistress, Abigail Thornwood, a cold woman who usually ignored the house slaves, mentioned how wonderful the meals had been lately. "You've outdone yourself." "Maria," Master Edmund said one evening in October, "this roast is perfection." "Thank you, Master," Maria replied, eyes down, voice neutral. Inside, she was cataloguing everything, every movement, every pattern, every weakness. She learned that Master Edmund took afternoon naps in his study at 2 p.m. every day, that Nathaniel inspected the cotton fields from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. every morning, that Jeremiah spent hours alone at the cotton gin, writing in his journal, that Caleb visited his cabin behind the big house every evening at 9 p.m. She learned which doors were locked and which weren't, which floorboards creaked, which windows had broken latches. She memorized the layout of the entire big house, every room, every hallway, every exit. She paid special attention to the family's routines around holidays. In November, as Thanksgiving approached, she asked casually, "Master Edmund, will you be having a large gathering for Christmas this year?" No, he replied.
"Just family."
"We keep Christmas Eve quiet now, a tradition my father started 40 years ago. The women and children go to bed early. Us men stay up, enjoy some bourbon, watch you prepare the feast. Peaceful evening before the chaos of Christmas Day." "I see, Master. And what time do you prefer to begin Christmas Eve preparations?" "Oh, you know the routine, Maria. You've been here for 12 Christmases now. We'll be in the kitchen by 9 p.m. You'll work until midnight. We'll drink and stay out of your way." "Yes, Master. I remember now." She did remember. She remembered perfectly. Every Christmas Eve for the past 12 years, the 4 Thornwood men, Master Edmund and his 3 sons, would spend from 9 p.m. until midnight in the kitchen building. It was their tradition. The women would go to bed early, exhausted from Christmas preparations. The children would be asleep by 8 p.m. For 3 hours, Maria would be alone in the kitchen with the 4 men who had murdered her family. The kitchen building was separate from the big house, connected by a covered walkway, but isolated enough that sounds didn't carry. The walls were thick brick, the windows small and high up, and the cauldrons were always there. Maria's plan crystallized with perfect, terrible clarity. She began gathering what she needed. First, the plants. Maria had learned herbal medicine from Abigail, the elderly enslaved woman who taught her English decades ago. She knew which plants healed and which killed. She needed plants that would incapacitate without killing, at least not immediately. On her trips to gather cooking herbs, a task Master Edmund encouraged because it improved the food, Maria collected oleander from the ornamental gardens. She found digitalis foxglove growing near the slave quarters, originally planted for heart medicine, but deadly in high doses. She located hemlock growing in the damp areas near the cotton fields. She dried these plants in secret, hidden in her cabin beneath the floorboards. Ground them into powder using a mortar and pestle stolen from the big house medicine cabinet. Tested tiny amounts on rats. The plantation was full of them. The digitalis killed a rat in 20 minutes. Too fast. The oleander took 40 minutes. Still too fast. But a careful combination of all 3, in precise doses, produced something interesting: paralysis. The rat couldn't move, but it stayed conscious. Its eyes tracked movement. It was aware but helpless. Perfect. Maria spent weeks perfecting the mixture, testing different ratios, calculating dosages based on body weight. She estimated Master Edmund weighed about 180 pounds, Nathaniel 220, Jeremiah 190, Caleb 175. She needed them conscious. She needed them to understand what was happening. She needed them to feel every second of what she was going to do. Next, she needed a delivery method. The men would be drinking bourbon. They always did. but they poured it themselves from a decanter they brought from the big house. She couldn't poison the bourbon directly without risking poisoning the wrong people. Then she remembered they always ate while drinking. Smoked meats, cheese, bread. Master Edmund particularly loved her gingerbread. He ate several pieces every Christmas Eve. Gingerbread, perfect. The strong molasses and spice flavors would hide any bitter taste from the poison. Maria began practicing. In early December, she baked gingerbread several times, perfecting the recipe, ensuring it was Master Edmund's favorite treat. He praised it every time. "Maria, this gingerbread is exceptional. Make sure you prepare plenty for Christmas Eve." "Yes, Master. I'll make extra just for you." She smiled when she said it. A small, cold smile that Master Edmund mistook for pride in her work. Finally, she needed to prepare the cauldrons. She couldn't raise suspicion by requesting extra lard before Christmas. That would be questioned. But she could gradually accumulate it. Every time she rendered fat from pork, she saved an extra cup. Every time she made soap, she set aside a pound of lard. By mid-December, she had hidden away 20 gallons of pork fat, stored in barrels in the back of the kitchen storage room, covered with burlap and forgotten. No one noticed. No one cared. The kitchen was Maria's domain. Master Edmund never set foot in the storage areas. Everything was ready. On December 23rd, Maria visited her family's graves one last time before Christmas. The Mississippi winter was mild, still 60 degrees during the day, but the nights were cold. Maria stood in the enslaved people's graveyard as the sun set, casting long shadows across unmarked graves. She had brought offerings, cornbread, water, tobacco. She placed them on each grave, Isaiah, Grace, Hope. Then she knelt in the dirt and spoke in Yoruba. "Tomorrow night it happens. I've waited 3 months, planned every detail. Tomorrow they die the same way you died. I promise you this, they will suffer. They will know terror. They will understand what they did to you." She cut her palm again, reopening the scar from 3 months ago. "Let blood drip onto the graves. Watch me tomorrow. Guide my hands. Give me strength if I falter. And when it's done, when their screams have stopped and justice is served, know that I did this for you. Everything for you," the wind picked up. In the distance, she could hear spirituals being sung in the slave quarters, preparations for Christmas celebrations. Maria didn't sing. She just knelt there, hand pressed to the earth, connecting with her dead family. "I love you. I've always loved you. And tomorrow I will prove it." She stood, brushed dirt from her dress, and walked back toward her cabin. Tomorrow was Christmas Eve. December 24th, 1847, dawned cold and clear over Thornwood Plantation. Maria woke at 4:30 a.m. as always. She dressed in the darkness of her cabin, the same cabin she'd shared with Isaiah, Grace, and Hope, the same cabin where laughter had once existed. Now it was just a tomb she slept in. She walked through the slave quarters toward the big house. Other enslaved people were beginning to stir. Christmas was the one day they received off work. Tomorrow, December 25th, they would rest, sing, celebrate what little joy they could find in this hell. Maria would not be celebrating. As she entered the kitchen building, she paused at the doorway. 4 giant cauldrons sat in their usual spots, empty and cold. Soon they would be filled. Soon they would be hot. Soon she began breakfast preparations. The Thornwood family expected a feast today. Christmas Eve breakfast was always elaborate. Ham, eggs, biscuits, gravy, grits, fresh bread, preserves, coffee. Maria prepared everything mechanically. Her hands moved through familiar motions while her mind walked through tonight's plan for the 100th time. At 7 a.m., she served breakfast in the big house dining room. Master Edmund sat at the head of the table, his 3 sons flanking him. Mistress Abigail Thornwood sat at the opposite end, her face pinched and cold as always. 4 grandchildren, Nathaniel and Jeremiah's sons, ranging from age 6 to 12, chatted excitedly about Christmas presents. Wonderful breakfast. "Maria," Master Edmund said, cutting into his ham, "tonight's Christmas Eve dinner will be spectacular, I'm sure." "Yes, Master," Maria replied. "I've been preparing for weeks." "Good, good. Remember, we'll be in the kitchen from 9 o'clock until midnight. Same tradition as always." The women will retire early with the children. I remember, Master. Nathaniel spoke up, mouth full of biscuit. You're making that gingerbread father loves, aren't you? Of course, Master Nathaniel. Extra batches, just as Master Edmund requested. Excellent, Master Edmund smiled. I look forward to it. You won't enjoy it for long, Maria thought. But her face remained neutral, subservient, empty. She cleared the breakfast plates and returned to the kitchen. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. Maria cooked constantly, preparing the Christmas Day feast that would be served tomorrow, baking pies and cakes, roasting meats. Other house slaves helped with cleaning and setup. But the kitchen itself was Maria's alone. At 2 p.m., while the family napped, Maria began the final preparations. She retrieved the hidden barrels of lard from the storage room. 20 gallons, enough to fill 4 cauldrons halfway. She poured 5 gallons into each cauldron, working quietly, methodically. Then she covered them with large lids so no one would see the oil inside. To any casual observer, the cauldrons appeared empty, ready to be used for Christmas cooking. Next, the poison. Maria had hidden the mixture beneath the floorboards of the kitchen storage room, wrapped in oilcloth. She retrieved it now, a small leather pouch containing 2 ounces of finely ground powder, a mixture of oleander digitalis and hemlock in precise proportions, enough to paralyze 4 men without killing them. She had tested this mixture for 3 months, knew exactly how much was needed per pound of body weight, had calculated the dosage for each man down to the grain. Master Edmund, 180 pounds, 1/2 ounce. Nathaniel, 220 pounds, 5/8 ounce. Jeremiah, 190 pounds, 1 per 2 ounce plus 1 grain. Caleb, 175 pounds, now 7/16 ounce. Maria had measured it all out into separate small pouches, each man's personal dose. At 4 p.m., she began baking the gingerbread. The recipe was complex. Molasses, ginger, cinnamon, cloves, brown sugar, butter, flour, eggs. The smell filled the kitchen, warm and festive and innocent. It was a smell associated with Christmas, with joy, with celebration. Maria felt nothing as she mixed the batter. No joy, no anticipation, just cold focus. She baked 4 separate batches in 4 separate pans. Each batch was identical except for one ingredient. The first batch, for Master Edmund, contained his dose of poison mixed thoroughly into the batter. The second, for Nathaniel, his dose. The third, for Jeremiah, his dose. The fourth, for Caleb, his dose. The poison was tasteless in the strong molasses and spice. Maria had tested this too. The gingerbread tasted exactly as it always did. By 6 p.m., the gingerbread was cooling on racks. Maria had marked each pan with a tiny scratch on the corner. 1 scratch for Master Edmund's batch, 2 for Nathaniel's, 3 for Jeremiah's, 4 for Caleb's. Only she would know which was which. At 7 p.m., she served Christmas Eve dinner to the family in the big house. It was a feast. Roasted goose, ham, sweet potatoes, collard greens, cornbread, fresh rolls, 3 types of pie. The family ate with enthusiasm, praising Maria's cooking, laughing and talking about tomorrow's celebrations. Maria served each course mechanically, poured wine, cleared plates, smiled when expected to smile. Master Edmund raised his glass in a toast. To family, to prosperity, and to another successful year at Thornwood Plantation. "Hear, hear!" The sons echoed. Maria thought of another family. A family boiled alive 3 months ago. A family whose ghosts were watching, waiting, not long now. At 8:30 p.m., Mistress Abigail stood from the table. "Come, children. Time for bed. Christmas morning comes early." The grandchildren protested but were herded upstairs by their mothers. Within 30 minutes, the big house fell quiet. The women and children retired to their rooms on the 2nd and 3rd floors. Only the 4 Thornwood men remained downstairs, moving into the study for cigars and brandy before heading to the kitchen. Maria returned to the kitchen building. Alone now. Everything was in place. She removed the lids from the 4 cauldrons. The lard sat waiting, cold and still. She began building fires beneath each one, using seasoned hardwood that would burn hot and steady. At 8:45 p.m., she heard footsteps on the covered walkway. The 4 Thornwood men entered the kitchen, bringing the smell of cigar smoke and brandy with them. "Ah, Maria," Master Edmund said jovially. "Here we are, same as every year. We'll stay out of your way while you work. Just pretend we're not here." "Yes, Master," Maria said softly. The men settled into chairs they'd brought from the big house, positioned near the warmth of the ovens but out of the work areas. Master Edmund carried a crystal decanter of bourbon and 4 glasses. They poured drinks, lit cigars, relaxed into their Christmas Eve tradition. Maria worked around them, preparing components for tomorrow's breakfast. But her attention was on the fires beneath the cauldrons. She fed them steadily, watching the flames grow hotter. The lard began to warm. At 9:30 p.m., Master Edmund called out, "Maria, do you have any of that gingerbread ready? I've been thinking about it all day." "Yes, Master. It's just cooled enough to serve." Maria brought out the 4 pans. She cut generous pieces from each, making sure to serve each man from his designated pan. "Here you are." "Master Edmund," she said, handing him a plate with 2 large pieces from the 1-scratch pan. "Nathaniel." "Master, 2 pieces from the 2-scratch pan." "Jeremiah." "Master, 2 pieces from the 3-scratch pan." "Caleb." "Master, 2 pieces from the 4-scratch pan." "Wonderful." Master Edmund took a large bite. Still warm. Delicious as always, the other men ate enthusiastically. Nathaniel finished his first piece in 3 bites. Jeremiah savored his more slowly. Caleb asked for seconds. "Of course, Master Caleb," Maria said, serving him 2 more pieces from his designated pan. More poison. Double dose. She wanted to make absolutely certain. The men ate and drank and smoked. They talked about cotton prices, about next year's planting, about politics in Washington. They laughed about something Nathaniel had done to a field hand the previous week. Maria worked silently and waited. The fires beneath the cauldrons burned hotter. The lard temperature climbed steadily. 150 degrees. 200 degrees. 250 degrees. At 10:15 p.m., Master Edmund shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I feel rather warm." "Is it hot in here?" "The ovens, Master," Maria said. "I can open a window if you'd like." No, I'm fine," but he wasn't fine. The first symptoms were beginning. Flushing, increased heart rate, slight dizziness. At 10:30 p.m., Nathaniel tried to stand and stumbled. "Whoa, perhaps I've had too much bourbon." "Lightweight," Caleb laughed. But his own words were slurring slightly. At 10:45 p.m., Jeremiah dropped his cigar. "Tried to pick it up." His hand wouldn't cooperate properly. "Something's wrong." "What do you mean?" Master Edmund tried to stand. His legs gave out. He fell back into his chair heavily. I can't." Panic crept into his voice. "Boys, do you feel strange?" All 3 sons tried to respond. Nathaniel managed to stand, but swayed dangerously. Jeremiah's mouth opened, but only slurred sounds emerged. Caleb slid from his chair onto the floor. "Maria," Master Edmund said, his voice thick and slow. "Get help. Something's—" Maria turned from the stove to face them. Her expression was no longer neutral, no longer subservient, no longer empty. For the first time in 3 months, her face showed emotion. "Cold, terrible, focused rage. There will be no help," she said quietly. Master Edmund's eyes widened. What did you—" His words stopped. The paralysis was taking full effect now. His mouth still moved, but no sound came out. His eyes darted around frantically, but his body wouldn't respond to commands. Nathaniel collapsed completely, falling face first onto the floor. He lay there, conscious, breathing, but unable to move a single muscle except his eyes. Jeremiah managed to stay seated, but was frozen in place, his hand still reaching for the dropped cigar. Locked in that position, Caleb lay on his back on the floor, eyes wide, chest rising and falling with rapid, panicked breaths, but otherwise completely immobile. Maria walked slowly to where Master Edmund sat, frozen in his chair. She bent down so her face was level with his, looked directly into his terrified eyes. "Do you remember September 18th? She asked softly. 3 months ago? Do you remember what you did?" Master Edmund's eyes screamed. His mouth tried to form words. Nothing came out. You boiled my husband alive in oil. You boiled my 2 daughters alive in oil. You made me watch. You made me watch my entire family die, screaming in agony. She stood up straight. Tonight you're going to understand what they felt. Maria walked to the cauldrons. The oil was bubbling now, approaching optimal temperature. She checked it with a practiced eye. 375 degrees. Perfect frying temperature. She returned to the terrified men. I'm going to explain what's happening to you. You're paralyzed. A mixture of oleander, digitalis, and hemlock. You can't move. You can't speak. But you can feel everything. You can hear. You can see. And most importantly, you're conscious. She gestured to the cauldrons. That's pork oil. 15 gallons in each cauldron. Heated to 375 degrees, the same temperature I used to fry chicken. Hot enough to cook meat instantly. Master Edmund's eyes were leaking tears now. Not from sadness, from pure terror. Each of you is going to die exactly the way my family died. Boiled alive, conscious in agony. And I'm going to watch the same way you made me watch. She checked her small pocket watch. Stolen from the big house weeks ago. It's 11:00 p.m. I have 1 hour until midnight. That's plenty of time for all 4 of you. Maria walked to Caleb first, the youngest, the handsome one, the one who'd suggested killing Grace and Hope. We'll start with you, she said. Caleb's eyes went impossibly wide. His chest heaved with hyperventilation, but he couldn't scream, couldn't beg, couldn't move. Maria was strong from years of kitchen work, lifting heavy pots, kneading dough, carrying supplies. And Caleb, while a grown man, only weighed 175 pounds. She grabbed him under the arms and began dragging him toward the first cauldron. It took effort, but rage gave her strength. She pulled him across the floor, his paralyzed body sliding along the brick, his eyes rolling frantically, tears streaming down his face. When she reached the cauldron, she positioned him beside it. The heat from the oil radiated intensely. Caleb could feel it on his face, the promise of what was coming. This is for Grace and Hope, Maria said. For every enslaved girl you raped and murdered. For every life you destroyed because you could. She grabbed rope from the wall, the same rope used to truss turkeys. She tied Caleb's hands behind his back and his feet together. Not because he could move, the poison ensured that, but because this was how it had been done to her family. Every detail had to match. Then, using a wooden ladder and a pulley system normally used for lifting heavy pots, Maria hoisted Caleb's bound body up and positioned it over the cauldron. His eyes stared down at the bubbling oil. He could see it, could feel the heat, could understand exactly what was about to happen. Maria lowered him in feet first. The moment his feet touched the oil, Caleb's body convulsed. Not from his own muscle control, which was gone, but from pure nervous system response to incomprehensible pain. His eyes bulged, his mouth opened in a silent scream that couldn't emerge because his vocal cords were paralyzed. Maria lowered him further. Ankles, calves, knees. The smell of cooking meat filled the kitchen. Caleb's skin blistered instantly, huge bubbles forming and bursting. The oil splattered and hissed. His legs turned white, then red, then began to blacken as the flesh cooked. Lower, thighs, waist, stomach. Caleb's eyes rolled back in his head, but he couldn't pass out. The poison kept him conscious. His entire body shook with seizures. Blood vessels burst in his eyes, turning the whites red. Lower chest, shoulders. The sound was horrific. Oil bubbling violently, flesh sizzling and popping, bones cracking from the heat. The smell was overwhelming. Burning hair, cooking meat, fat rendering. Finally, Maria lowered Caleb's head beneath the surface. The bubbling became frantic as moisture in his head turned to steam. His face cooked. His eyes boiled in their sockets. His tongue swelled and burst. His hair singed away completely, Maria counted, just as she'd been forced to count while watching her daughters die. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. At 4 minutes, Caleb's body stopped convulsing. At 5 minutes, all movement ceased. At 6 minutes, she was certain he was dead. She left his body in the oil and turned to the other 3 men. They had watched everything, unable to look away. unable to close their eyes, another effect of the poison. Forced to witness Caleb's death in perfect, horrible detail, Jeremiah had vomited the only muscle control he still possessed. Vomit ran down his chin onto his chest. His eyes were wide with terror beyond comprehension. Nathaniel had urinated on himself. The stain spread across his trousers. His chest heaved with rapid, panicked breathing. Master Edmund was crying. Tears streamed steadily down his face. His eyes locked on Maria with desperate pleading. "Now you understand," Maria said quietly. "Now you know what my daughters felt. Caleb took 6 minutes to die. Grace took 7. Hope took 8. You're going to experience every second they did." She walked to Jeremiah next. "You kept a journal," she said. "You called it scientific observation. You documented enslaved people's pain like we were experiments. You timed how long it took for us to pass out from agony. Do you remember?" Jeremiah's eyes screamed silently. "Tonight, you're the experiment." She dragged Jeremiah to the second cauldron, tied him the same way, hoisted him up using the pulley system. "This is for my husband Isaiah," Maria said. "For every enslaved person who died in your accidents. For every moment of torture you inflicted." While taking notes, she lowered Jeremiah into the oil, feet first, slow, deliberate, making sure he felt every inch of descent. Jeremiah's silent screams were trapped behind paralyzed vocal cords. His body convulsed wildly. The oil hissed and spat. His legs cooked. His genitals boiled away. His stomach blistered. Maria lowered him steadily. No mercy, no rushing. This had to last. When Jeremiah's head went under, his body thrashed with the last desperate instinct for survival. But there was no escape. The oil cooked his face, his brain, his life away. 7 minutes. That's how long Maria counted. The same amount of time Grace had taken to die. She left Jeremiah's corpse in the cauldron and turned to the remaining 2 men. Nathaniel and Master Edmund sat frozen, forced to watch their family members die one by one. Both were crying now. Both had lost control of their bladders. Both knew exactly what was coming. Maria approached Nathaniel. "You were the head overseer," she said. 200 lashes was your record for a single day. You whipped a pregnant woman 40 times and laughed when she miscarried. You broke children's fingers for working too slowly. You separated families for profit. She dragged his massive body, 220 pounds of muscle and cruelty, toward the 3rd cauldron. This is for every scar on every back you whipped, for every life you destroyed with quotas and violence. Nathaniel was the largest, but Maria's rage made her strong. She hauled him to the cauldron, tied him, hoisted him. "You die the same as my family. And I want you to know, in your last moments, you're not a master, not an overseer. You're just meat, and I'm cooking you." She lowered him in. Nathaniel's body was larger, so the oil level rose higher, splashing over the sides. The heat was intense. His massive form cooked slowly, so much meat to burn through. His feet blackened. His legs split open from the heat, fat bubbling out. His torso blistered in layers. His arms seized up as muscles cooked and contracted. Maria lowered him deeper, shoulders, neck, face. His eyes stayed open under the oil for a full 30 seconds before they burst. 8 minutes, the same time Hope had taken to die. Maria left him in the cauldron and turned to Master Edmund. Only one left. Master Edmund sat frozen in his chair, the last of his line still living. He had watched his 3 sons die in the most horrific way imaginable, had been forced to smell their burning flesh, had been unable to look away from any detail of their agony, and now he knew his turn had come. Maria walked slowly toward him. In her hand she carried a knife, a small paring knife from the kitchen, sharp and clean. She knelt in front of his chair so they were eye to eye. "Edmund Thornwood," she said. His first name. She had never spoken it before. Enslaved people didn't use masters' first names, but tonight they were equal. Tonight he was just another piece of meat. "You are 62 years old. You've owned enslaved people for 40 years. You've branded 89 human beings with a hot iron. You've separated 50 families by selling children away from parents. You've personally killed 30 people through beatings and punishments. You've raped uncounted women. You've built an empire of suffering." She pressed the tip of the knife against his throat, not hard enough to cut, just enough to feel. "And on September 18th, 1847, you killed my husband and my 2 daughters by boiling them alive. Because you could. Because we were property. Because our lives meant nothing to you." A single tear rolled down Edmund's frozen face. "You're going last, because you need to understand the complete weight of what you've done. Your entire line ends tonight. Your 3 sons are dead. Your name dies with you. Everything you built, this plantation, this empire, this legacy, it all ends in this kitchen with your body boiling in oil." Maria stood up. "And I want you to know something. I'm not sorry. I'm not conflicted. I don't feel guilty. I feel satisfaction. I feel justice. I feel what you stole from me, agency, choice, power." She set down the knife and grabbed Edmund under his arms. He was heavier than his sons, 180 pounds of aging plantation owner. But Maria dragged him anyway, pulled him out of his chair, let him fall to the floor, dragged him across the brick kitchen floor like a sack of flour, his face scraped against the brick. Blood ran from his nose. He felt everything but could do nothing. Maria pulled him to the 4th and final cauldron. The oil bubbled, waiting. She tied his hands and feet. Then she did something different. She reached into her dress pocket and removed a small cloth bundle, unwrapped it carefully. Inside were 3 items: Isaiah's wedding band, a simple iron ring he'd forged himself, a ribbon from Grace's hair, a small wooden doll that Hope had carried everywhere, the only things Maria had saved from her family. "They're watching," she told Edmund. "Every spirit you've destroyed is watching. And they demand payment." She placed the 3 items on a small shelf near the cauldron, a makeshift altar, whispered a prayer in Yoruba, asked the ancestors to witness justice. Then she turned back to Edmund. "You took 8 minutes to kill my husband. 7 for Grace, 8 for Hope, 23 minutes total. You're going to take longer." She hoisted him up using the pulley, positioned him over the bubbling oil. "Any last thoughts, Master Edmund?" "Oh, wait, you can't speak. Just like Isaiah couldn't speak after 4 minutes of boiling. Just like my daughters couldn't scream for me to help them." She began lowering him, feet first. The moment Edmund's feet touched the oil, his entire body seized. Even through the paralysis, pure agony forced reactions. His heart hammered. His blood pressure spiked. Vessels burst in his eyes, his face, his neck. Maria lowered him slowly, inch by inch, ankles cooking. Skin sloughing off, bone showing through calves blackening, muscle separating from bone, fat bubbling up through splits in the skin, knees cracking from thermal stress. Cartilage melting, Edmund's silent screams were trapped behind frozen facial muscles. But his eyes communicated everything: terror, agony, regret, pleading. Maria felt nothing but cold satisfaction, thighs boiling, the largest muscles cooking slowly, taking time. She paused here, left him suspended with oil up to his waist. Let him hang there for a full minute, experiencing the extended torture. "My daughters hung like this," Maria said, "dying together, holding each other, calling for me, and I couldn't help them. You made me watch them cook like meat." She lowered him further, genitals boiling away, intestines heating inside his body cavity, internal organs beginning to cook. The smell was overwhelming now. 4 bodies cooking in 4 cauldrons, filling the kitchen with the scent of human barbecue. Stomach, chest, shoulders. Edmund's chest heaved with rapid, shallow breaths. His heart was failing. Too much pain, too much trauma, too much shock. But the poison kept him conscious, kept him aware. Finally, Maria lowered his head beneath the surface. Oil bubbled violently around his face. His eyes stayed open, boiling. His mouth opened in a silent scream, and oil rushed in, cooking his throat, his tongue, his lungs. Maria counted. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Edmund's body thrashed. Pure nervous system response. No longer conscious control. 4 minutes. 5 minutes. The thrashing slowed. 6 minutes. 7 minutes. Stillness. 8 minutes. 9 minutes. Maria was certain he was dead. But she waited. 10 minutes. 11 minutes. 12 minutes. At 13 minutes, she released the pulley. Edmund's body sank fully into the oil. It was 11:58 p.m. Maria stood in the kitchen, surrounded by 4 cauldrons, each containing a boiled corpse. 4 Thornwood men, dead, cooked, destroyed exactly as they had destroyed her family. The fires still burned beneath the cauldrons. The oil still bubbled. The smell was overwhelming. Burnt hair, cooked flesh, rendered fat. Maria should have felt something. Horror at what she'd done, guilt, remorse, fear of consequences. She felt none of those things. She felt only completion, justice, balance. She walked to the small altar where she'd placed Isaiah's ring, Grace's ribbon, Hope's doll. She knelt before it, hands pressed together, and spoke in Yoruba. "It is done. Your deaths are avenged. Every one of them paid with the same agony they inflicted on you. Rest now, rest peacefully. Know that I loved you. Know that I fought for you. Know that their screams were for you." She stayed kneeling for several minutes, head bowed, finally allowing herself to feel something other than rage. Grief. Deep, bottomless grief for what had been taken from her. For 12 years of marriage ended in boiling oil. For 2 daughters who would never grow up. For a life that could have been but was destroyed by evil men, she cried. For the first time since September 18th, Maria cried. Not the broken, keening wail of that terrible day, but quiet tears of mourning and release. When she finished crying, she stood, wiped her face, looked at the 4 cauldrons one last time. "Merry Christmas," she said to the corpses. Then she walked out of the kitchen into the cold Mississippi night. It was midnight exactly. Christmas Day, 1847. Maria walked past the big house, silent, everyone asleep. Past the slave quarters, dark except for a few scattered fires. She walked to the graveyard where her family was buried. There, she lay down on the earth between the 3 graves. Isaiah on her left, Grace and Hope on her right. "I'm so tired," she whispered. "I'm so tired of fighting, of surviving, of existing in this hell." She closed her eyes. For the first time in 3 months, she slept without nightmares. Christmas morning arrived with brilliant sunshine and unseasonably warm weather. 75 degrees by 9 a.m. Mistress Abigail Thornwood woke early, as she always did on Christmas. She dressed and went downstairs, expecting to find her husband and sons already awake, perhaps nursing hangovers from their late night of bourbon. The downstairs was empty. "Edmund," she called. No answer. Strange. Usually they were up by now. She walked toward the kitchen building, thinking perhaps they'd fallen asleep there. It had happened once before, years ago, after too much drinking. She pushed open the kitchen door. The smell hit her first. An overwhelming stench of burnt meat mixed with something chemical and wrong. The kitchen was still warm from fires that had burned out hours ago. Abigail's eyes adjusted to the dim light. 4 cauldrons. 4 bodies, she screamed. It was a sound that carried across the entire plantation, a shriek of horror and loss that woke everyone within a quarter mile. Within minutes, people came running, overseers, house slaves, field hands. Everyone converged on the kitchen building. What they found was beyond comprehension. 4 grown men boiled to death in cooking oil. Their bodies were grotesque. Skin sloughed off in places, bones visible, faces destroyed beyond recognition. The smell was unbearable. Several people vomited immediately. The overseers tried to restore order. "Everyone back to your quarters. This is a crime scene." But the enslaved people stood frozen, staring. Some were horrified. Some were terrified of punishment. And some, though they hid it, carefully felt something else. Satisfaction. Head overseer, a man named William Cooper, who'd been spared only because he didn't participate in the Christmas Eve tradition, took charge. "Someone get the sheriff, now, and find Maria. Where is Maria?" Enslaved people looked at each other. No one knew. Cooper grabbed a field hand named Samuel, a different Samuel from the driver who'd betrayed Isaiah. "You check her cabin. Find her immediately." Samuel ran to the slave quarters. Checked Maria's cabin. Empty. He continued to the graveyard. Something told him to look there. He found Maria lying peacefully between 3 graves, arms outstretched as if embracing the earth. Her eyes were closed. She appeared to be sleeping. Samuel approached cautiously. "Maria?" No response. He knelt down, touched her shoulder gently. "Maria?" Still no response. He checked for breathing. For a pulse, nothing. Maria was dead. Samuel ran back to report. "She's gone. Maria's dead. In the graveyard." Confusion exploded. "Dead? How? When?" Dr. Whitmore, the plantation's physician, was summoned from his Christmas breakfast in town. He arrived an hour later and examined Maria's body where she lay. "No marks of violence," he reported. "No signs of trauma. She appears to have simply stopped living. Heart failure, perhaps. Or she took poison herself." "Check her cabin for poison," Cooper ordered. They found the hidden leather pouch beneath the floorboards. Still contained traces of the Oleander digitalis hemlock mixture. "She poisoned them," Dr. Whitmore concluded. "Then poisoned herself. Murder-suicide. But this didn't explain how one enslaved woman had managed to put 4 grown men into cauldrons of boiling oil. That required strength, equipment, time, unless they'd been incapacitated first. Dr. Whitmore examined the gingerbread still sitting on the kitchen counter. Noticed the tiny scratches on the pan corners. Realized what had happened. "She fed them poison first," he said slowly. "Paralyzed them but kept them conscious. Then boiled them alive while they couldn't fight." "Back!" The room fell silent as the full horror of what had happened sank. One enslaved woman had systematically murdered 4 white men in the most brutal way imaginable. Had planned it for months, had executed it perfectly, and had died peacefully afterward, having accomplished her revenge. Sheriff Thomas Barrett arrived from Yazoo City at noon. He was a large man with a thick beard and cold gray eyes. He examined the crime scene methodically. "This is the worst thing I've seen in 30 years of law enforcement," he said. "But it's also remarkable. The planning, the precision, the calculation." He turned to the gathered crowd. "Who was Maria? What happened to her?" The enslaved people stayed silent, but the overseers told the story. About Isaiah's alleged theft, about the public execution in September, about grace and hope being thrown into the oil. Sheriff Barrett listened. His expression darkened. So Edmund Thornwood boiled this woman's husband and children alive in front of her, then expected her to continue cooking his meals, and was surprised when she took revenge. They were his property, Cooper protested. He had every right to boil children alive. Barrett interrupted. "I don't care what the law says. That's pure evil." He looked at the 4 corpses still in the cauldrons. Edmund Thornwood created this. He murdered that woman's family in the most horrific way possible. She simply returned the favor. "So what happens now?" Cooper asked. "Nothing," Barrett said. "She's dead. The perpetrator is dead. There's no one to arrest, no one to hang. Case closed. But the other slaves, surely some of them helped her. Should we interrogate them? Make examples?" Barrett shook his head. "You start whipping people for this, you'll have a full uprising on your hands. Every enslaved person on this plantation saw what happened in September, saw children murdered, and now they've seen those murderers get exactly what they deserved." He lowered his voice. "Leave it alone. Bury all 5 bodies. Tell people it was a tragic accident. And pray this doesn't inspire others. But it was too late for that. News of the Thornwood massacre spread through the Mississippi Delta like wildfire. Within a week, every plantation in Yazoo County knew the story. Within a month, it had reached New Orleans, Memphis, Charleston, Richmond. Within 3 months, the entire South was whispering about the cook of Christmas. Different versions emerged, some accurate, some embellished. But the core remained the same. An enslaved woman had murdered her master and his 3 sons on Christmas Eve as revenge for her murdered family, and she'd done it using the same method they'd used on her loved ones. The story terrified slave owners throughout the South, because if it happened at Thornwood, one of the most secure, well-run plantations in Mississippi, it could happen anywhere, to anyone. Plantation owners began taking precautions. They stopped celebrating holidays in kitchens. They started having enslaved people taste food before eating it. They installed locks on bedroom doors. They slept with loaded pistols. Some even treated their enslaved people slightly better, motivated by fear rather than morality. Insurance companies began charging higher premiums for plantation owners. The risk assessment had changed. Enslaved people were no longer seen as passive property, but as potential threats. In January 1848, 3 similar incidents occurred across the Deep South. In Louisiana, a house slave named Thomas poisoned his master's entire family during a New Year's celebration. 8 people died. Thomas was caught and hanged, but not before telling the story of Maria during his trial. In Alabama, an enslaved woman named Ruth set fire to the big house while the family slept, killing 5. She escaped and was never caught. Letters she left behind referenced the courage of the Christmas cook. In Georgia, a blacksmith named Jacob killed 2 overseers with a hammer in what appeared to be spontaneous rage. But investigators found a hidden journal detailing months of planning. The first entry read, "If Maria could do it, so can I." The pattern was undeniable. Maria's revenge had sparked something across the South, a psychological shift in how enslaved people viewed resistance. For decades, the system had relied on the belief that enslaved people would accept their fate, that they were broken enough, scared enough, controlled enough to never truly fight back. Maria shattered that illusion. She proved that careful planning could overcome physical disadvantages, that intelligence and patience were weapons, that even the most powerless person could bring down the most powerful if they were willing to pay the ultimate price. Slave patrols doubled across Mississippi. Curfews became stricter. Punishments for minor infractions became more severe. The system tightened in fear, but it was too late. The seed had been planted. By spring of 1848, Maria's story had reached the Underground Railroad network. Conductors, the brave individuals who helped enslaved people escape to freedom, began using her story as inspiration. When newly escaped people wavered, frightened of pursuit, conductors would tell them about the woman who'd killed 4 masters and died free. "You think running is brave?" They'd say, "Maria stayed and made them pay. You can at least run." The story reached Frederick Douglass in Rochester, New York. Douglass, himself an escaped slave and now the most prominent black abolitionist in America, was fascinated. He sent investigators to Mississippi to verify the story. They interviewed enslaved people who'd witnessed the September execution. They reviewed sheriff's reports. They examined death certificates. In May 1852, Douglass published an article in his newspaper, The North Star, titled The Christmas Reckoning, Justice Delivered by an Enslaved Mother. He wrote, "We do not condone murder. We cannot celebrate violence, but we must acknowledge that Maria of Mississippi did what the law would not do, delivered justice for the murder of innocents. When a mother watches her children boiled alive, and the law calls it discipline, or when a wife sees her husband tortured to death, and the law calls it property management, or when human beings are reduced to meat, and the law protects the butchers, what recourse remains?" Maria's actions were horrific, but they were no more horrific than what was done to her family. They were no more horrific than what is done daily to 3 million enslaved people across this nation. They were simply visible, undeniable, impossible to ignore. The Thornwood family died the same way they had killed. That is not justice, it is symmetry. But in a nation where justice is denied to black people by law and custom, perhaps symmetry is the closest we can come. Let Maria's story stand as a warning to every slaveholder. You are not invincible. You are not untouchable. Every person you brutalize, every child you separate from parents, every life you destroy, these actions have consequences. Perhaps not today, perhaps not tomorrow. But eventually, inevitably, the bill comes due, and when it does, do not be surprised if payment is demanded in blood. The article was reprinted in abolitionist newspapers across the North. It was read at anti-slavery meetings. It was discussed in churches, in parlors, in town halls. The South responded with fury. Mississippi officially banned the North Star. Possession of abolitionist literature became punishable by prison time for whites and death for enslaved people. But the story couldn't be stopped. It existed now in the oral tradition of enslaved people, passed in whispers from plantation to plantation, mother to daughter, father to son. It became a spiritual. The lyrics were coded, as many spirituals were, with double meanings that only enslaved people understood. On Christmas Eve, the Lord came down, 4 angels fell without a sound. The cook prepared the holy feast, and demons burned from most to least. White listeners heard a Christmas religious song. Enslaved people heard the story of Maria. Meanwhile, back at Thornwood Plantation, the aftermath continued to unfold. Mistress Abigail Thornwood had a complete breakdown after discovering her husband and son's bodies. She was institutionalized in an asylum in Jackson, Mississippi, where she died 3 months later. The official cause was listed as melancholia, but the staff reported she spent her final days screaming about burning men and oil. The plantation itself was sold at auction in March 1848. No one wanted to live there. No one wanted to sleep in the big house where 4 men had been murdered. The property sold for a fraction of its value. The new owner, a cotton broker from Memphis named Harrison Kemp, tried to continue operations. But enslaved people refused to work in the kitchen building, refused to enter it at all. Kemp had it demolished and built a new kitchen, but that didn't help. The enslaved people at Thornwood had tasted something they'd never experienced before, the knowledge that revenge was possible. Productivity plummeted. Accidents increased. Tools went missing. Fires started mysteriously. Nothing major, nothing that could be definitively blamed on anyone, but constant wearing resistance. Within 2 years, Kemp sold the property at a loss. It changed hands 3 more times over the next decade. Each owner struggled with the same problems. By 1860, Thornwood Plantation was largely abandoned. The big house stood empty. The fields returned to wild growth. The slave quarters were silent. During the Civil War, it was used briefly as a field hospital by Confederate forces. Soldiers reported strange occurrences, sounds of screaming from the demolished kitchen area, the smell of burning flesh when no fires were lit, shadows of children playing in the graveyard. After the war, freed people in Yazoo County avoided the property. They said it was haunted, cursed, that the spirits of those who died there, both the murdered, family and their murderers, could not rest. The property was eventually subdivided and sold for farming in the 1880s. Today, the exact location of Thornwood Plantation is disputed. The big house foundation was plowed under decades ago. The slave quarters have long since rotted away, but the graveyard remains. Local historians have identified it, a small clearing in what is now a soybean field, marked by a few weathered stones. Most graves are unmarked, as enslaved people's graves typically were. But 3 graves sit close together, positioned as if the occupants are holding hands. No names, no dates. Just 3 stones. Oral tradition in the black community of Yazoo County says those are the graves of Isaiah, Grace and Hope, and that Maria is buried there too, though no 4th stone exists. Every Christmas Eve, people leave offerings, flowers, food, candles, honoring a family destroyed by slavery, honoring a mother who took terrible revenge, honoring a woman who refused to accept what had been done to her. The story of Maria of Mississippi raises uncomfortable questions that echo 177 years. Later, was what she did murder or justice? In legal terms, it was clearly murder, premeditated, brutal, and methodical. 4 men killed in cold blood, but in moral terms, the question is more complex. Edmund Thornwood and his sons murdered Isaiah, Grace, and Hope. They did so publicly, legally, with no fear of consequences. The law protected them. Society supported them. The entire system of slavery enabled them. When law provides no justice, when murder is legal as long as the victims are black, where does justice come from? Maria answered that question with boiling oil. Some historians argue she was mentally broken by trauma, that her actions cannot be judged by normal standards, that watching your family murdered would drive anyone to madness. Others argue she was perfectly sane, that her 3 months of careful planning demonstrate rationality, not insanity, that she made a conscious choice to prioritize revenge over survival. Both perspectives may be true. The abolitionist community in 1848 was divided on how to respond to Maria's story. Radical abolitionists like John Brown saw her as a hero, a soldier in a righteous war against an evil institution. They argued that enslaved people had not just the right, but the duty to resist slavery by any means necessary, including violence. Moderate abolitionists were uncomfortable with celebrating murder, but understood why it had happened. They used Maria's story to argue that slavery itself was the cause of such atrocities, that removing slavery would prevent future Marias. Some anti-slavery activists tried to bury the story entirely, fearing it would make their cause look barbaric and hurt their efforts to win over moderate whites. But Frederick Douglass understood something crucial. Maria's story was powerful, precisely because it was disturbing. It forced people to confront the reality of slavery in visceral terms. It's easy to abstract slavery, to talk about it as an economic system, a political issue, an abstract moral wrong. It's much harder to ignore the image of a mother watching her children boil alive, than spending 3 months plotting perfect revenge. That image burns into the mind. It cannot be forgotten or dismissed, and that was exactly the point. In the context of American history, Maria represents something larger than one woman's revenge. She represents the untold thousands of enslaved people who resisted slavery. Through violence, acts that were systematically erased from historical records because they contradicted the narrative that enslaved. People were content with their condition. History books for decades portrayed slavery as a relatively benign institution, harsh perhaps, but marked by loyalty between enslaved people and enslavers. The myth of the happy slave persisted into the 20th century. Stories like Maria's destroy that myth. They prove that enslaved people were not passive victims. They were human beings who fought back when pushed beyond endurance, who used every tool available, including violence, to resist their oppression. The historical record contains glimpses of hundreds of similar cases. In 1831, Nat Turner led a slave rebellion in Virginia that killed approximately 60 white people over 2 days. Turner was motivated partly by religious visions, but also by witnessing brutal punishments of enslaved people. In 1841, Madison Washington led a rebellion aboard the slave ship Creole, killing 1 enslaver and taking control of the vessel. The ship sailed to the Bahamas, where all enslaved people aboard gained freedom. In 1856, Margaret Garner killed her own daughter rather than let her be returned to slavery. Her story inspired Toni Morrison's novel Beloved. These are the famous cases, the ones that made it into historical records because they were too large to ignore. But for every Nat Turner, there were dozens of unknown enslaved people who poisoned a master, set fire to a barn, or caused a fatal accident. For every Margaret Garner, there were hundreds of mothers who resisted in smaller ways, teaching their children to read despite it being illegal, preserving African traditions despite pressure to assimilate, or simply surviving with dignity intact. And for every Maria of Mississippi, there were thousands of enslaved people who dreamed of revenge, but never had the opportunity or courage to act on it. Maria is exceptional, not because she was the only one who wanted revenge, but because she actually achieved it. What happened to the enslaved people of Thornwood plantation after Maria's death? Historical records are incomplete, but fragments exist. Approximately 200 enslaved people lived at Thornwood in 1847. After the massacre, they were sold at auction, families separated. Individuals scattered across the Deep South. Some ended up on plantations in Louisiana, working the sugarcane fields. Others were sent to Alabama's Cotton Belt. A few were sold to domestic service in cities like New Orleans and Mobile. But wherever they went, they carried Maria's story with them. 20 years later, when the Civil War ended slavery in 1865, many of those who'd witnessed the events at Thornwood were still alive. They told their children and grandchildren about the woman who'd avenged her family, about the Christmas Eve when 4 white men died screaming, about the proof that resistance was possible. In the 1930s, the Works Progress Administration conducted interviews with formerly enslaved people as part of the Federal Writers' Project. These interviews captured the last living voices of people who'd experienced slavery firsthand. One interview, conducted in 1936 in Jackson, Mississippi, includes a tantalizing reference. The interviewee, a woman named Sarah Johnson, was 94 years old. She'd been enslaved on a plantation neighboring Thornwood. When asked about Christmas traditions, she paused for a long moment. Then she said, "We didn't celebrate Christmas Eve much on our place. Master was afraid of it after what happened at Thornwood. I was just a girl then, maybe 7 years old, but I remember everyone talking about it, about a cook who killed her master and his sons. Used the cooking pots. My mama said it was justice from God. Master said it was evil. But I'll tell you this, Master started treating us a bit better after that. Not much, but enough that you noticed. Fear is a powerful teacher." The interviewer noted in parentheses, subject refused to provide more details about the Thornwood incident, became visibly emotional and requested a different topic. That small fragment is one of the few direct testimonies that survived, but Maria's influence extended far beyond those who knew her personally. The psychological impact of Maria's story on the institution of slavery cannot be overstated. Slavery in the American South depended on a carefully maintained fiction that enslaved people were inherently inferior, incapable of complex thought, naturally suited for servitude, and generally content with their position. This fiction was necessary. Without it, the cognitive dissonance of treating human beings as property would have been unbearable for most enslavers. Maria shattered that fiction. Her actions proved several things that terrified slave owners. First, that enslaved people were capable of sophisticated long-term planning. Maria plotted her revenge for 3 months, calculated dosages, tested poisons, studied routines, prepared alibis. This was not the action of an inferior intellect. This was strategic genius. Second, that the appearance of docility meant nothing. Maria had been the perfect slave for 12 years, obedient, skilled, trusted with keys to every door. And all that time she was fully human, fully capable of independent thought, fully aware of the injustice of her situation. She simply waited for the right moment. Third, that no amount of power guaranteed safety. Edmund Thornwood was one of the wealthiest men in Mississippi. He had 3 strong sons, armed overseers, 200 enslaved people under his control, an entire legal and social system backing his authority, and he died screaming as his skin boiled off his bones. If it could happen to Edmund Thornwood, it could happen to anyone. This realization sent shockwaves through the slaveholding class. Plantation mistresses began refusing to eat food prepared by enslaved cooks unless someone tasted it first. Masters started locking their bedroom doors at night. Some families moved into cities entirely, hiring overseers to manage their plantations from a distance. Paranoia became endemic, and paranoia corrodes power. A system built on fear can only maintain itself if those in power feel secure. Once that security evaporates, the system becomes unstable. Maria's revenge, one woman's act of horrific violence, was a small crack in the foundation of American slavery, not enough to topple it, but enough to weaken it, enough to show that the edifice was not as solid as it appeared. 13 years after Maria's death, the Civil War would begin. The institution of slavery would crumble. 4 million enslaved people would gain freedom. Maria didn't cause that, but she contributed to the atmosphere, the growing sense among enslaved people that resistance was possible, that white supremacy was not invincible, that dignity could be reclaimed through action. She was one of thousands of resistors, but her resistance was perfectly documented in its horror, impossible to deny, impossible to minimize, impossible to forget. The moral complexity of Maria's story has made it controversial among historians and educators. Some argue that celebrating her actions, or even discussing them neutrally, glorifies a murder and could inspire violence. Others argue that refusing to discuss such stories perpetuates the sanitized version of slavery that textbooks have traditionally presented, a version that erases enslaved people's agency and resistance. This attention reflects a broader challenge in teaching American history. How do we honestly confront the violence of slavery without either minimizing it or sensationalizing it? Maria's story is violence meeting violence. Horror answered with horror. There's no clean moral takeaway, no easy lesson, but perhaps that's exactly why it must be told, because the truth of American slavery is not clean. It's not comfortable. It's not a story with clear heroes and villains where everything resolves neatly. It's a story of multi-generational trauma, of systematic dehumanization, of people pushed beyond the limits of human endurance, and sometimes, not often but sometimes, a story of people who pushed back. Maria pushed back. Was she right? Was she wrong? Was she justified? Was she a monster? History doesn't answer those questions. It simply records what happened. A mother watched her family die. 3 months later, the people who killed them died the same way. The woman who killed them died peacefully beside her family's graves. Make of that what you will. Today, and 77 years after Christmas Eve, 1847, Maria's story is being rediscovered. For decades, it existed primarily in oral tradition among black communities in Mississippi. Local knowledge passed down through generations. Stories told by great-grandparents to great-grandchildren. But in recent years, historians focusing on enslaved people's resistance have begun documenting these stories more formally. In 2003, historian Stephanie M.H. Camp published Closer to Freedom: Enslaved Women and Everyday Resistance in the Plantation South, which included a brief reference to the Thornwood incident. In 2016, the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., opened with an exhibit on slave resistance that mentioned Maria's story, alongside Nat Turner's Rebellion and the Underground Railroad. In 2019, a team of archaeologists from the University of Mississippi conducted a survey of the former Thornwood plantation site. They found the foundation of the demolished kitchen building. Excavation revealed something haunting. 4 circular burn marks in the brick floor, spaced evenly, approximately 4 feet in diameter each, the marks where the cauldrons had sat. The discovery sparked renewed interest. News articles appeared. Documentary filmmakers inquired. Descendants of Thornwood's enslaved community organized a memorial service at the site. On Christmas Eve 2019, exactly 172 years after the massacre, approximately 200 people gathered in the soybean field where Thornwood Plantation once stood. They held candles. They sang spirituals. They told Maria's story to a new generation. One speaker, a great-great-great-great-granddaughter of an enslaved woman who'd witnessed the September 18th execution of Isaiah, Grace and Hope, said, "We are here to remember not just what happened on Christmas Eve, but what happened before it. We remember Isaiah, a blacksmith who dreamed of freedom. We remember Grace, who loved to help her mother cook. We remember Hope, who was only 8 years old. We remember their lives, not just their deaths, and we remember Maria not as a murderer, not as a hero, but as a mother who loved her family so much that she was willing to become a monster to avenge them. We don't celebrate what she did, but we understand why she did it. And we honor the fact that she refused to accept what was done to her. She refused to move on. She refused to forgive. She demanded payment for what was taken, and she took it herself. That is not a lesson in how to live, but it is a testimony to the strength of black people who survived the unsurvivable, who endured the unendurable, and who, when pushed to the absolute limit, pushed back. The story of Maria of Mississippi will never have a comfortable ending because it isn't a comfortable story. It's a story about the darkest capabilities of human beings, both the evil of enslaving people and the violence that such evil can provoke. It's a story about a mother's love twisted into weapon, about grief transformed into rage, about justice delayed and delivered in blood. It's a story that forces us to confront questions we'd rather avoid. What would you do if someone murdered your family and the law protected them? How much suffering can a human being endure before something breaks? Is revenge ever justified? Where does justice come from when law provides none? These questions have no easy answers. Maria didn't look for easy answers. She looked for her husband and daughters in 3 graves and decided that their deaths demanded payment. And on Christmas Eve, 1847, she collected that debt in full. 4 men died screaming that night. 1 woman died peacefully the next morning. A family's murder was avenged. A cycle of violence came full circle. 177 years later, we're still trying to understand what it means. Perhaps we're not meant to understand it. Perhaps we're only meant to remember. Remember that slavery was not a historical abstraction, but a living nightmare for millions of people. Remember that those people were not passive victims, but human beings with agency, intelligence, and the capacity for resistance. Remember that systems of oppression always produce resistors, and sometimes those resistors fight back with everything they have. Remember Isaiah, who died screaming in oil. Remember Grace and Hope, 2 little girls murdered for having the wrong father. Remember Edmund, Nathaniel, Jeremiah, and Caleb Thornwood, who built an empire of suffering and died in the tools of that empire. And remember Maria, cook, mother, widow, killer, who refused to let her family's deaths go unanswered, who spent 3 months planning perfect revenge, who looked into the eyes of her family's murderers as they died the same way they'd killed, who walked calmly to her family's graves and lay down between them. Finally, at peace, who became a legend whispered in slave quarters across the South, who proved that even the most powerless person in the most oppressive system can find a way to make the powerful pay. Her story is not a happy one. It's not an inspiring one in any conventional sense, but it is a true one, and truth, no matter how dark, must be remembered, because those who forget history are condemned to repeat it, and those who erase the stories of the oppressed are complicit in their continued oppression. So remember Maria of Mississippi. Remember Christmas Eve 1847. Remember that freedom has always been fought for, never given. Remember that justice delayed is justice denied, and when denied long enough, people create their own justice. Remember that every system of oppression contains the seeds of its own destruction, and remember that 4 men died in boiling oil because they thought human beings could be owned. That is the legacy of American slavery. That is the story of Maria, and that story will echo as long as injustice exists in this world.